This is an introduction to the iCut Pro Fade technique, a technique that will eliminate you having to turn back and forth to your station, and two, a technique that will help you get through the haircut in a way faster time, ultimately bringing down your turnover time. The iCut Pro Fade technique was formulated because of the simple fact that when we teach fading, we find that every clipper has a different setting or a different definition of what zero is. Zero being the closest setting at the front of the blade, where the cutting blade and the guide blade meet. On some clippers, there's a little gap at the front. Other clippers, there is no gap. Some gaps are bigger than others. And what I'm saying is, if we were able to have a clipper that would give you a true definition of what zero is, like the modified fast feed, you'd find that we'd be able to execute the fade in a lesser time because we won't need to implement different tools to get that zero setting or other blades to graduate from that zero setting. So the iCut Pro Fade technique is formulated around the concept, do not create a line and you won't need to take a line out. It also helps eliminate having to use other clippers or other blades to accomplish the fade. So what you're going to see me do today is going to be done in real time, in little to no time, and it's going to give you that finished product that you're looking for. Understanding the iCut Pro Fade technique will help you to see that on every clipper there's a different setting of zero. With the fast fade clipper, you'll find that the guide blade and the cutting blade are as close together as they'll possibly get. This would produce the closest setting to zero that you can possibly get, similar to what a trimmer produces or a balding blade. What you're going to see me execute is the fade technique, starting with the lever all the way open, and you're going to see me close it 4 times, 1, 2, 3, and 4, to get back to absolute zero on this particular clipper. Now, if you use this technique on any other clipper, the concept will remain the same, but if the clipper doesn't have a zero setting, what would happen is you will not get that absolute zero that blends into a balding blade or a trimmer. So pay attention to the technique. It's going to go 1, 2, 3, and 4, bringing you back to zero.
Now, if you use a 1.5, like I'm using in this video, then what you want to do is you want to cut the hair with the grain. Now, any clipper that you use or any guard that you use for the top, the rules will apply. So for the 1.5, I'm cutting here with the grain, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go against the grain on the sides. The reason I do that is because once I pick up a guard, I want to be able to use it in its entirety before I put it down. That will eliminate me having to turn back and forth to the station. So the 1.5 is going with the grain, and then I'm coming back against the grain. Now it's going to leave a little ridge, but when I change my guards, it's going to be to a guard that will help me to blend in the sides into the top, and that guard is a 1 guard. If you notice, I'm using the comb and I'm combing as I cut, and the reason why is because I'm looking for a finished product in every section of the haircut. So right now I'm connecting the sides to the top. Now, when I do the fade technique, this 4-part process is what's going to take care of the major part of the haircut. That takes a lot of time and is probably the most difficult for a lot of barbers. So I'm starting with the half and I'm moving downwards on the side of the head until I get to the 0. So if you notice, the clipper is flat against the client's head. Anytime I were to change the positioning of my wrist, let's say I were to lift my wrist higher and change the angle on the clipper, what would happen is the fade technique would end up looking distorted. So the only advice that I can give as far as getting the fade technique perfect is however you start with your angle on your clipper, keep that consistent all the way through when applying the fade technique, and you will have no problems at all. Now, one thing to be mindful of, if you pay attention, you'll see that the range of motion of my wrist has gotten shorter as I got to the lower part of the haircut. But if you go back to when I first started, my range of motion was a lot greater than you see here. So I'm using the 1.5 guard, and if you notice, it's a guard that I used prior, but now this guard is an actual part of the fade technique. So essentially I could have started from the top, moving downwards with this particular guard even before I did the fade technique, but in order to show you exactly how the fade technique is done, then I would need to start from the first step and then go into all the different steps. And this is the procedure that you're going to use for every single fade that you do. So this is the 3-step process going through the 1 guard, which is the second step of the fade technique. The first step would be creating that transition from skin to 1/2. And the second step would now be using the 1 guard for the 3-step process, moving downwards towards the 1/2 line. And that's where we are now. So if you notice, the clipper is all the way closed. Now I'm taking that guard off and replacing it with the 0 guard, which is going to take care of the last line that we have, which is the first line that we created. So as we move through that process, you'll see how that last line, which is the first line, is now being erased. And if you look closely, you'll see that the transition of the entire fade is already taken care of. In a 3-step process, 1 without guard, 2nd step with the 1 guard, and 3rd step with the 0 guard. Now, when we have these guards, the 1 guard would be equivalent to the 1/8 guard that you would normally see in different clipper types. And the 0 guard would be equivalent to the 1/16 guard that you see with different clipper types as well. Now, once the fade is finished, I can now go into different procedures that would help me accumulate a higher ticket behind the chair. In this particular procedure, this is the Pro Color Enhancement, which I'm using a brush to fill in the edges of the hairline to give a more precise haircut overall. So I'm putting the base color on the edge of the hairline and brushing it in, because once the Pro Color Enhancement is done, the actual enhancement will be totally undetectable by the client and also by anyone looking at the hair. So you brush the color in to match it with the actual hair that's already on the client's head. Now this base color is a color that we use. You can use any semi-permanent color to accomplish this. Now once we put the base color on, what we're doing is we're putting holding spray on to hold that color onto the client's head before applying the hair fibers. Now once we apply the hair fibers and we allow it to dry, then we can go ahead and place the line on the client's head. Now once your clippers are properly calibrated, you shouldn't have a problem applying a line to the outer edges of the client's haircut. Always let the client know the pros and cons of the Pro Color Enhancement. The Pro Color Enhancement is a solution that lasts 2 to 3 days in clean, shampooed hair. When doing the Pro Color Enhancement, you want to make sure that the client's hair is washed, completely dry and clean, so that there's no debris or buildup on the scalp, and so that you get the best possible line. Any questions on clipper calibration, you can refer to the iCut Pro Academy, and you'll be able to get information on how to properly calibrate your tools so that you can get these types of outcomes when you line the client's edges. Now, while we're on the topic of lining, a lot of barbers have issues or questions concerning prices on services. So I'm just going to shed some light on the edge up, or the shape up, as it's commonly called. What happens with the shape up is a lot of people tend to get a shape up if they can't afford or they feel as if they don't need a haircut. So what happens is a lot of barbers end up doing shape ups, spending the same amount of time on the client as they would spend on a haircut, because the barber tries to find ways of giving that shape up the look of a finished haircut, which there is no way possible. So what tends to happen is the barber spends 15 minutes, 20 minutes on the client and makes half the money that they should make. So what you want to do when pricing your shape ups is strategically price your shape ups so that a client will possibly choose a haircut rather than getting a line because the prices are close together. For instance, I'm gonna give you a perfect example. You have a barber who charges $20 for a haircut and $10 for a shape up. Now a haircut takes 30 minutes and a shape up, even though it should take half the time, it takes about 15 to 20 minutes as well, which means that you can't possibly fit another shape up within that half an hour period, so you find yourself losing money. What needs to be done is you need to strategically price your shape ups so that the client will opt out of the lineup and get a haircut instead. So, perfect example, you can price a shape up at $20 and price your haircuts at $30. So a client would be more inclined to getting a haircut rather than a lineup. And this is where you want to be, because in terms of time versus reward, you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're doing shape ups and making half the money but spending the same amount of time doing the haircut. And this happens more often than not. Now after the haircut, you want to use the Miracle Serum as the antiseptic, because just like in the shape up, you would still have to use the antiseptic. You would still need to use Cool Care, a neck strip, hot towel, and all these different things in order to give the client the best possible experience. So it doesn't make sense to shortchange yourself in the process of giving someone a lineup. So strategically price your services and always make sure to use proper antiseptics to make sure that the client doesn't get any type of irritation on their skin, scalp, or on their face. To purchase Miracle Serum, visit iCutPro.com or iCutProAcademy.com. This is your finished product. Fade technique, 15 to 20 minutes with color enhancement. Now the price on a service like this, if you're counting the shampoo, which would be $15, the haircut, which would be $50, and the color enhancement, which would be another $10. So if you do the math, you're at $75 for this particular service.